Live from Washington, I'm Aisha Tanzim and you're watching Access Point. Over the last 10 days, the Pakistani media has been embroiled in a heated debate over the statements of certain religious leaders. When the head of TTP, Hakimullah Masood, was killed in an American drone strike, the head of a mainstream religious party, Sayyid Munawar Hasan, called him a martyr. Another mainstream religious leader, Maulana Fazlur Rahman, seemed to agree. This raises the question, when ideological differences within a state become so strong that the state's declared enemy number one becomes a hero for a segment of the society, can that state survive? Let's ask our guests. Joining me in the studio is Dr. Zubair Iqbal of the Middle East Institute. Oria Jan Maqbool is joining us via Skype from Lahore. He's an analyst and a columnist. And Ijaz Haider is with us on the phone from Islamabad. He's a columnist and a TV talk show host. And he also heads the National Security Affairs at Capital TV. Gentlemen, welcome to Access Point.
Thank you.
Let me start with you, Dr. Iqbal. Some people suggest that the scale of confusion within Pakistan is so much that it's become an existential threat for the state.
No, I think this is an exaggeration. Let me explain why I think that it's an exaggeration. First, the concept of Islam in Pakistan is a constant. It's not something which is variable. Over time, what has happened is that some of the parties which have not had much of a success in the elections have sought to bring themselves closer and closer to the extremist views in order to be able to establish a foundation for themselves, a vote bank, if you want to call it that. That in no way tends to negate the concept of the nation itself. Remember, in Pakistan, true that the country was created on the basis of the religion, but religion is a constant. It's the case with everybody accepting it as religion. By and large, everybody, or actually 90% people, are Muslims. Good or bad, it doesn't really matter, practicing or not practicing.
But we're not just talking about religion here. We're talking about the state seems to feel it's under threat from this particular group that they're fighting. And I don't want to go into the semantics of what makes a martyr, what doesn't make a martyr, but when the enemies of the state, the declared enemies, become your heroes, what does that show?
It really, actually, from my point of view, it's a very positive thing. The simple reason is we have a marketplace of ideas. People are presenting their views to people in general. A discussion is taking place, and I would expect that over time, rational decisions will be made. And people, Pakistanis are fairly smart in these matters. They understand and they accept. They look at the cost-benefit of all the ideas, and then they choose the right one. Okay. So from my point of view, it's not a bad thing.
You think it's a good thing, a marketplace of ideas. Mr. Maqbool, you are sitting in Pakistan. Do you agree with Dr. Iqbal?
I don't think so, because for the last 1400 years, this debate is very common in Muslim society. And fortunately, we are discussing the issue on the very day of Muharram, when the state was usurping certain things, and in 61 Hijri, Sayyidina Imam Hussain stood up. And he challenged the authority of the state because state is not implementing the laws which actually the Islam desires to be implemented. And later on, Zayd bin Ali stood up against Banu Umayyah, and then there are successive movements who actually challenged the state. And the religious people, the religious jurists, always declared them as shaheed throughout Muslim history. And they were actually challenging the authority of the state because of the one reason that the laws which actually Islam demands to be implemented has not been implemented by the Muslim rulers of the state. So the debate is all over for the last 1400 years and is still going on. What is to be done by the state and what is not to be done by the state, that is the issue. And then what's the time when you have to challenge the authority of the state? So these are the issues which are always pertinent in a Muslim society.
Well, let me include Mr. Ijaz Haider in the conversation here, who's joining us via telephone from Islamabad. Mr. Haider, in a modern society, the supremacy of the Constitution is considered almost a must for a modern democratic state. Mr. Oria Jan Maqbool seems to think that this debate has been going on for a long time. Do you think a modern state can survive? without the supremacy of the Constitution that its elected members have decided upon?
No, I'm afraid not. But let me just go back to what Mr. Maqbool Jan said with reference to Muharram. Firstly, it was a contest. It wasn't an established state. There was a contest. Secondly, the deep irony of this is that those who are today standing up and challenging the Pakistani state are those who actually subscribe to the ideology of the Umayyads who fought against Imam Hussain rather than the other way around. So I think that deep irony must not be missed. And again, it's about narratives. Today, those who are killing the followers of Imam Hussain are the ones who use the narrative of Karbala, turn it around to their advantage. This is about the war of narratives also. Now, coming back to your question about the modern state, if we look at 1648, the Peace of Westphalia as the cutoff point, and thereon we have the modern state, yes, the social constitutional construct is something that is extremely important to this state. Now, the problem in Pakistan, and one of your participants was talking about Pakistan being a marketplace of ideas. Yes and no. I mean, this is now a state where there are X number of people who are actually prepared to act in and through a mindset that is essentially supra-state. And I can give you a number of examples. And it's not just about the Deobandis and the Salafis who have raised arms against the state. It is also the Barelvis. When a police guard who is actually assigned to protect someone decides that he's going to kill that person with a weapon that has been officially given him to protect that person, he actually goes supra-state. He decides at some point that he is actually assigned to do something greater than what the state stands for. And that is the kind of mindset that is going to unravel the state if it is not stemmed.
Dr. Zubair Iqbal, he raises a very good point. The marketplace of idea exists around the world, but there's this bottom line understanding that even if you want to change the Constitution, it needs to be done a certain way. You fight for years, but not violently. You convince people that you're right, and eventually the change comes. This idea that the state doesn't have the monopoly on violence anymore, and anybody considers himself or herself
Look, this basically reflects the weakness of the state more than anything else. The point is, here is a society of 180 million people, where the total resources of the country, of the government, are less than 15% of total GDP, which is, I think, the fifth lowest in the world. How do you expect that state, or the machinery of that state, to enforce its laws, its regulations, and its avowed objectives? What you need to do is to understand it's the weakness of the state more than anything else that determines what's happening right now. So what you have to do is to strengthen the state. Now, how do you strengthen the state becomes a very important issue, because in that, elites tend to be able to compete with each other, and they clearly, especially those elites that wish to retain their power as they have had for a long time.
And when you say elite, you don't just mean rich people.
No,
you mean the status
mullah
quo.
is included in that. The religious elites is included in that. Military is included. Bureaucracy is included. Judiciary is included. The point is, you do not have enough resources to be able to run an effective state. Unless you are in a position to mobilize those resources and then use them efficiently, you cannot, under any circumstances, impose the state's will on people and keep them from doing illegal or unlawful things, like taking somebody's life illegally.
Mr. Maqbool, you mentioned the battle within Islam for the last 1400 years. In the modern eras, how do you apply that? If you don't accept the supremacy of the state, then how does anyone go on and argue that the US is violating it, or India is violating it, or anybody else for that matter?
One very important thing, actually I want to discuss the things which Mr. Ijaz Haider has discussed, that if Mr. Imam Khomeini follows the same dictum in Iran and he challenges the authority of the state, he's right, he's the follower of Hussein. If a person sitting in Kuwait, a person sitting in Bahrain, if he's following the ideology of Hussein, then he's all right. Every Muslim respects Hussein and his fight. Every Muslim respects the fight of Zayd bin Ali. Every Muslim respects the fight of Nafs Zakiyah against Abbasides. All Muslims believe that any state which is not implementing the Islamic fundamentals, it is legitimate to fight against it. One very important thing is, and I don't want to go into the details who fought and who is not, who is Umayyads or not, but the ideology is this. Second thing is, but let me talk about the modern state. Modern state was created after First World War. And modern state was created in a way that all three things have to be common among all the states. Number one is every state should have a constitution. For example, the constitution of Pakistan had 101 interpretations. Faisal Abdi has a different interpretation, and Chief Justice has a different interpretation. And the people, all 100,000 lawyers have a different interpretation. But people believe that the constitution has to be implemented. That's why Islam believes that whether Quran has different interpretations, there has to be jurists who should implement it, but let it be implemented. One very important thing. Second thing, modern was that every state should have a state bank, and they should have a paper currency. And the Bretton Woods Agreement actually engulfed all the states into a currency facade, which is basically fictitious, giving a number to a paper. And Bretton Woods Agreement actually enslaved the entire society. And third very important thing, that every country should have a national debt. Before 1947, this Indian subcontinent never had a single penny of debt. But this subcontinent created biggest irrigation system of the world, biggest railway system of the world, all services from its own resources. So the people have been made enslaved by a system by creating the modern nation state. In 1920, passport design was presented before the League of Nations. In 1924, visa regulations came into being.
So Mr. Maqbool, you're questioning the very idea of the modern nation state and whether it's even a good idea. Dr. Iqbal, I want you to jump here. You're an economy guy, lots of experience at the IMF. What do you want to say to what Mr. Jan is saying?
I think we need to move into the present world. We should not be thinking backwards. We have to look forward. The idea of whether the country should have external debt or domestic debt or not is basically the choice of the country itself, number one. Number two, whether they should have a central bank which issues the currency is a non-issue. It's irrelevant. In today's world, if you're going to grow, and that is basically a requirement under Islam, that as the vice-regent of God, humans are supposed to maximize their effort and to achieve the highest level of productivity, because that's how they're going to be tested as to whether they're good or bad. Have they done their job or not? That's why establishment of these institutions like the banks or the central bank or the mobilization of debt and so on and so forth is relevant. It's good. It's not a bad thing. What you need to realize is you should have policies in place which do not lead to inequity, number one. Number two, that do not necessarily generate misallocation of resources, because that, from my point of view, under Islam, is a crime.
Okay, let me have Mr. Ijaz Haider jump in here. Mr. Haider, do you think that in Pakistan people need to prioritize their identities? Is there a need to prioritize whether they're Muslims first or Pakistanis first, and whether they subscribe to the idea of nation state or to the Ummah?
Yeah, that's a very important question. Well, let me just say that I'm not sure I understand the mumbo-jumbo that Mr. Jan has just delivered himself of. My reference to the Karbala incident was something that he referred to, and I was just saying that it was a state where groups were contesting for power. But if we take that example, then we have to turn it around and we have to realize that the most powerful group in that state actually exercised its monopoly of violence even against the grandson of the Prophet, peace be upon him. That is one very important point. The other issue is that Mr. Jan, for instance, himself has been a bureaucrat, and I'm sure he still is probably a bureaucrat. So he has taken an oath of fealty to this nation state and the constitutional construct that this state has. Now, if he were to argue in the way that he has, the little bit that I've been able to understand from what he has said, a lot of this, as I said, just soared over my head. So he has to consider the state and its social constitutional construct as the unit of analysis. Now, once you move away from that as the unit of analysis, then you're actually opening the door to a lot of anarchy. And that anarchy we actually witnessing every day in this country. And therefore, when, as you initially talked about this whole issue of martyrdom, who is a martyr? And I'm not looking at the issue of martyrdom in any religious sense. I'm looking at the issue of martyrdom more in the sense of whether you want to legitimize the state or you want to legitimize people who are actually rising up against the state. And therefore, my unit of analysis is the state, and I must also clarify that my reference to Karbala, once again, had nothing to do with religious denominations, because I don't think religious denominations really work in a modern state, whether they are Shia denominations or any of the Sunni denominations. And this is the most important point at this moment in the history of Pakistan. What is it that we really want to stand up for? Because once you say that a state has been formed, then the issues of Amar and Nahi pass on to the state. The issue of who you're going to wage jihad against or who you're going to declare war on is something that is the remit of the state. It cannot be privatized. Now, of course, the groups that have stood up against the state have a very convenient way of circumventing this argument and by declaring that the state is not Islamic enough. Now, who is going to decide which state is Islamic enough? Because Sharia itself has not been codified.
Yeah, Mr. Haider, let me get Mr. Maqbool Jan to answer that. Mr. Jan, in a democratic society, aren't people who are all Muslims giving the right to their representatives to interpret the Constitution and the Quran for them and decide what the state needs to do? This is not a kingdom.
But first of all, I just want to question how the democracy is run. Democracy is basically a slave of the entire corporate media. For example, if Obama does not have $6.8 billion to be funded by the corporate culture, he cannot run the elections. And even the 3.8 billion euros, if Sarkozy is not being provided, he cannot run the elections. The parties are funded by the entire corporate media, and the elections. So
I understand that point that you're making about democracy and corporate media. Let me come back to the other question that Mr. Haider raised. What is then the unit of analysis that you will use, if not the state? You being a bureaucrat, how do you go and interact with the rest of the world?
One very important thing is that every Pakistani has a right of freedom of expression under Article 19 of the Constitution, number one. Second thing is, when all these modern states were being created, and 199 states have been created, all the states said that we are Iraqis, we have a background from Hanging Gardens of Babylonia, let's give us our land, piece of land. The Egyptians said, we are the sons of the pharaohs, give us the state. Iranians said, we belong to the Cyrus land, give us that. But Belgium says, we have our own king, we should have our own state. But we, the Pakistanis, were the only one. It's the only example on the face of this world that we said that I, being a Muhammad Hussain Chima, and he being Arjan Das Chima, we have same genealogy, we have same ancestry, but we are not the brothers. We should live differently. So what was the reason of creating such a state? Because we represent a very different kind of state in this world. That is the only example. We are not Israel, because in Israel, no native native said that we should have a separate state. All the people were migrated from Europe, from Russia, from Africa, from all other countries, and they were sent to Israeli land, and the state was created.
Don't you think that idea, Mr. Maqbool, don't you think that idea was undermined by the separation of Bangladesh? Eventually, nationalism won over religious identity?
Number one thing, Bangladeshis created Bangladesh on the basis of language, But when the concept of creation of a country came, the people living in India said, look, you are Muslims. you should have a separate land. Calcutta should not be part of your country. So in another country, on the basis of two-nation theories came into being. Because if the language has been the uniting factor, if the Bengalis have been the uniting factor, Calcutta should have been the place, the central place of all the Bengalis. So another nation was created on the basis of religion.
But Mr. Maqbool Jan, another aspect of the two-nation theory at that point was that Hindus and Muslims cannot live together. They are living together in India. There are almost as many Muslims in India as there are in Pakistan.
Should I give you the figures of such a report? Such a report says that in India, 40% people are living below poverty line and they are Muslims, and 38% poverty line is Dalit. Dalit is the lowest caste of Indians. Means after Shudra, Dalit came. So Muslims living there are, in the entire FBI, there's not a single Muslim. In the entire, what you can say, the border security forces, there's not a single Muslim. In the entire, what you can say, the famous intelligence agencies of North.
Let me try to bring it back to what. I get your idea. Let me try to bring it back to what we were talking about originally and have the other two guests jump in. Dr. Zubair Iqbal.
Look, the modern state, the way it is evolving, is very different from what it used to be traditionally in the past. The fundamental principle of the modern state is how does individual and groups of individuals benefit from the resources of a particular place, which they call a state. If they have a stake in that particular state and the allocation and utilization of resources of that particular state, and they benefit from it and not being mistreated or being maltreated by others, then there will be movement towards the establishment of a nation state. Nation state does not necessarily come from having people from the same identity as such. That's a misnomer. It's not applicable anymore. In the case of Pakistan, the problem that exists is that our economic development has slowed down and there has been an increase in income inequality, with the result that a very large number of people are now feeling that they are being mistreated or being exploited. And they are now falling upon the very basic principle of equity under Islam in order to demand change. What that country needs in order to transform itself from a good state to a good nation is to strengthen the role of the state. To do that, it has to allocate its resources efficiently. It has to eliminate the elites which are perpetuating their power and are living off implicit subsidies from the rest of the society. If you can do that and you can ensure equity, which is a fundamental principle of Islam, you will be able to have a state which will be consistent with the nation that you want.
Mr. Haider, how does Pakistan do that?
Well, let me just say that Mr. Maqbool Jan's sense of history reminds me of what Dorothy Parker wrote about a particular book, and she said, this is not a book to be tossed aside lightly, it must be thrown with great force. So if we look at the history which formed Pakistan, it was for the rights of the Muslims of India. It was to be a state for the Muslims. It was not to be an Islamic state. That's a very fine distinction which has eluded Mr. Maqbool Jan. And I may also refer to the speech by Quaid-e-Azam on 11th August 1947, in which he very clearly lays down that's like the our sort of equivalent of the Federalist Papers, where he lays down the nature of this state. And this state was to be a pluralist state. And this was a state where everyone would have the freedom to practice their religion without let or hindrance. But this was not going to be a state which is going to determine what religion people will practice. This is not going to be a state where people would kill each other on the basis of religion. That said, how do we achieve that? Well, we are now at a stage where, far from this being a crisis of state, this is actually a crisis of the society. And this crisis, ironically, has been created by the state for reasons of various policies, created a certain kind of mindset. And that mindset, while the states can turn around, societies cannot really turn around that quickly. And therefore, now the state is facing sections, large sections of its own people who actually do not consider the state legitimate enough. And these are the sections of people who want to actually sacralize the state. And they have a very millenarian agenda, a historical agenda. They think history has stopped. And this is one of the basic problems. Even in terms of Islamic jurisprudence, over the last 600-700 years, there has not been much movement in jurisprudence for various reasons, and I don't think we have the time to get into those reasons. But the fact is that the state has to act, and it has to act fast. Otherwise, the jig will be up.
Let me throw it back to Mr. Maqbool Jan. I feel like if I just point to you, the discussion will move on. I don't want to even ask a question, but tell me something. How does Pakistan move? Go ahead,
What was the right of the Muslims? Why the right of the Muslims? How a Muslim becomes a Muslim? Just because he actually utters one sentence, and that is La ilaha illallah. So let me quote one very important speech of Quaid Azam. It is an official speech on 1st of July 1948 at the opening of the State Bank of Pakistan. And he actually started with the saying that I personally vouch the efforts of the research department to create a system based on Islamic principles which does not allow usury or interest. And second thing, the second sentence is that the Western civilization has created such a mess that only a miracle can save it. So these are two things of what he wants to implement.
Okay, Mr. Maqbool Jan, since we are coming towards the end, I'm going to push you guys to wrap up a little bit. Here's the thing.
Just one example. All the departments in Pakistan have been created by the Britishers. There is only one department which was created by Quaid Azam himself, and Allama Muhammad Asad was the head of the department, and the name of the department is Department of Islamic Reconstruction. And 4 tasks were given to Allama Muhammad Asad, and he has written the entire thing. That one is to draft an Islamic constitution, second is to develop an fundamental Islamic economic system, third was the Islamic social system.
Okay, so like I said, I have to come towards the end, and I want to wrap it up, Mr. Maqbool Jan. I want to start with you. Whatever you said is good, and you said freedom of speech, and people can demand it, people can try and convince other people, but what we are talking about here is people raising arms and actually taking law into their own hand. A state cannot survive if it doesn't have monopoly on violence, can it?
No, I don't believe that at the moment raising of the arm is a good thing. But one very important, why raising of the arms have been done by the people? Well, I should quote the Will Durant's famous book, Heroes of the History. He says, when you want to implement a morality code which is not basically followed by the majority of the people, then such people, such arms,
you have 10 seconds.
They emerge. And he quote the example of Elizabeth II.
We have very little time. Let me quickly come to you, Dr. Iqbal, 20 seconds.
Look, I think this discussion is, from my point of view, going a bit astray. The reason is very simple. We should not be looking in the past in order to look at the future. Yes, we have lessons from the past, but the future is dependent upon a number of things, including a world which is moving fast ahead of us. The point is, are we going to continue to still harp on the past, or are we going to grab what the future can possibly give us, and then create in that a society which allows for our people to maximize the use of your faculties and proceed and be better human beings and good Muslims?
Mr. Ijaz Haider, 20 seconds.
Yeah, well, I think where we stand, I would just say that we need to refer to 2 books. One by Abdul Fazl, who wrote The Great Theft, and the other by Timur Quran, which is about the long divergence of why the Middle East is where it is in terms of economic development. And I think we need to understand that history marches forward.
And not no backwards. I'm so sorry I have to interrupt. Our time is up. I hardly have time to thank all of you for joining us and all the people watching this show. Thank you and goodbye.